Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at something incredibly heavy, and honestly, it asks us to tap into our deepest sense of compassion. We're talking about the heartbreaking reality for dogs in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's the story of man's best friend, completely stripped of their innocence, weaponized as tools of war, and left to suffer as silent collateral victims. We aren't going to mince words here, and we're definitely not pulling any punches as we go through this source material. If it's in your heart, this is a call to really raise awareness about a tragedy that usually goes unspoken. Okay, let's look at how we're going to break this down. First, we'll cover the history of the Okits unit, then move on to alleged attacks on civilians and the abuse in detention centers. After that, we'll look at settler and police canine use, the calling of stray dogs, and finally, the domestic pets who have become casualties of war. Let's walk through these heavy themes together. Section 1. The Okits Unit History. So dating all the way back to the 1930s and officially established in 1974, the military's Okits, or Sting unit, took these totally innocent animals and fundamentally transformed them from loving companions into high-tech living weapons. Over the decades, right through the Second Intifada and into post-October 7th operations, what these dogs are forced to do has expanded drastically. They're strapped with body cameras and loudspeakers and then sent down into incredibly dark, terrifying tunnels. They are thrust into booby-trapped, deadly urban environments totally against their will, entirely stripped of their natural right to just live a safe, normal life. Now, what's really shocking here is that 99% of the roughly 70 military working dogs bought every year by the IDF are actually sourced from European suppliers, mostly out of the Netherlands and Germany. We're talking about highly driven, intelligent breeds like Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds. This highlights a massive international supply chain that is actively funneling these incredible animals directly into a violent conflict zone. Section 2. Alleged attacks on civilians. Human rights groups have put together some genuinely exhaustive and tragic documentation on this. Back in December 2014, there was video capturing a 16-year-old being terribly mauled by military dogs during an arrest in the West Bank, all while soldiers allegedly shouted commands. Then, fast forward to May 2024, leaked body cam footage actually showed a dog attacking an unarmed 60-year-old woman right in her Jabalia home. And just incredibly tragically, in July 2024, Mohammed Bahar, a 24-year-old man with Down syndrome, was mauled by an army dog in Gaza and left to die. In every single one of these nightmares, not only are human beings subjected to absolute trauma, but the welfare of the dogs is just entirely thrown out the window to facilitate violence. They are being completely misused and abused. And you know what happens when human rights organizations bring these horrific injuries to light? The military advocate general frequently just brushes these severe maulings off as professional mistakes or operational friction, rather than actual punishable misconduct. Because of the structural shield, the devastating trauma inflicted on civilians, and the tragic ongoing abuse of the dogs themselves just continues with near total impunity. Nobody is being held accountable. Section 3. Abuse in detention centers. NGOs and the UN argue that there are complex international laws being systematically shattered here. Like, according to the UN Convention Against Torture, intentionally using dogs to induce severe physical pain or psychological terror is, plain and simple, torture. Picture this. Dogs are being forced into tiny interrogation cells, straining on their leashes, forced bark just inches from the faces of blindfolded prisoners. These actions completely fly in the face of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and they drag these poor animals into participating in profound human rights violations. I really need to prepare you, because the severity of these testimonies cannot be overstated. Reports from Beit Salam and the UN detail entire sections of prisons literally known as al-Kalabat, or the dog wards. Detainees who have been released report being stripped naked and having large dogs commanded to step on them or bite them. But the absolute most harrowing allegations are that dogs have been used as instruments of extreme sexual violence and assault against detainees. And yes, that has sometimes included teenage minors who were swept up in raids. It is a complete and profound moral collapse. These innocent animals are being forced into roles of unspeakable violation. Naturally, these sexual assault claims have sparked a massive, intense debate. Defenders of these practices have labeled the reports blood libel, arguing that it's biologically impossible to actually train dogs to do this. But critics point right back at peer-reviewed veterinary and medical journals that prove this kind of anatomical trauma is, sadly, very possible. On top of that, they point to horrifying historical precedents, specifically records from the Nazi and Pinochet regimes where dogs were factually, undeniably documented as being trained to commit sexual violence against female dissidents. It's a dark history that we simply cannot ignore. Section 4. Settler and police canine use. Outside the military, dogs are frequently used as weapons for territorial expansion and intimidation. We're seeing armed settlers documented unleashing police breed dogs on Palestinian farmers right during their vital olive harvests. Border police use them to hunt down undocumented laborers. But the cruelty cuts both ways, and the sheer heartbreak of Palestinian pet owners is profound. In May 2026, there was this absolutely horrifying footage that surfaced showing a masked settler brutally clubbing an 18-month-old, tied-up Palestinian guard dog named Lucy over the head with a heavy rod. Miraculously, Lucy survived, but only after desperate veterinarian intervention. Can you imagine watching your beloved companion be beaten or killed while authorities just stand by? It represents such a devastating, heartbreaking layer of this conflict. Section 5. The culling of stray dogs. 1,300. That is the staggering number of stray dogs that were shot and culled by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority in the year 2025 alone. When the bombardment of Gaza left thousands of pets completely abandoned, starving, and wandering into border zones just looking for food, the main response wasn't rescue, it was mass shootings. This casual, horrific disregard for canine life is captured so chillingly in a whistleblower testimony from David McIntosh. He's a former Royal Marines commando who was working at an aid distribution site in Gaza. He reported that IDF snipers would actually shoot at the starving stray dogs running along the berms, simply using them for target practice. These dogs are already traumatized by endless airstrikes, desperately scavenging just to survive, and they are reduced to nothing more than living targets. And this systemic eradication was even formalized into law. In December 2024, the Knesset actually approved an emergency law that allowed for the immediate euthanasia of stray dogs found within 20 kilometers of the Gaza Strip and 10 kilometers of the Lebanon border. So instead of trying to coordinate any kind of humanitarian animal rescue, the official legislative response to thousands of feral, terrified dogs fleeing a literal war zone was just legalized culling. Section 6. Casualties of war. Pets. The cascading, tragic effects of this blockade are utterly devastating for domestic pets. There is a total veterinary collapse right now. That means there are no anesthetics for dogs suffering from horrific blast injuries. We're seeing huge outbreaks of parvovirus sweeping through starving packs of abandoned family pets. Grassroots heroes like the folks at Sulala Animal Rescue are trying their best, operating under impossible blockade restrictions, literally performing amputations without proper supplies. Even at the Gaza Zoo, 90% of the animals either starved to death or were killed in the bombings. And across the wider region, the threat of war has led fleeing expatriates and Gulf states to just abandon hundreds of their pets to the streets. These animals rely entirely on human care, and in the chaos of war, they are just left behind to suffer unimaginably. As we close this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a tough question. With international lawsuits now actively challenging the European supply chain of these dogs, arguing against exporting living ammunition, where do we finally draw the line? How do we reconcile the profound suffering inflicted upon these innocent animals with the terrifying violence they are forced to inflict on others? Please, we cannot let canines and other animals remain these silent, forgotten casualties of human controversy. Thank you for taking the time to raise your awareness with us today. Let's keep our hearts open and do whatever we can to speak up for those who can't.